Most Christians grow up with a clear picture of Satan as a name, a being, the ultimate adversary of God and his people, the one who tempts, deceives, accuses, and seeks to destroy. That understanding is rooted in Scripture, but the Hebrew Bible adds an important dimension that often goes unnoticed. In several of its earliest significant appearances in the Hebrew Bible, Ha-Satan functions less like a personal name and more like a title, one that means the adversary or the accuser. A title that emphasizes what this figure does rather than simply identifying who he is. Recognizing that changes how we read some of the Bible's most important passages, from Job to Zechariah, and sheds new light on why the New Testament so often describes Satan as the accuser. So let's begin with the Hebrew version. The Hebrew word is Satan. Its basic meaning is adversary, opponent, or one who accuses. It comes from a verbal idea meaning to oppose, to resist, or to act as an adversary. Rather than describing someone's nature, the word originally describes what someone is doing. Now notice something important. In several key Old Testament passages, the word appears with a definite article, Ha-SatanThe. It is literally the adversary or the accuser. In normal Hebrew usage, proper names do not ordinarily take the definite article. That is one reason many Hebrew scholars understand Ha-Satan in these passages as describing a role rather than simply functioning as a personal name. As we move through the Hebrew canon, however, the usage begins to change. Some later passages omit the article entirely, and many scholars see this as part of the biblical development towards Satan functioning as a recognized personal adversary. This is not a contradiction. It is an example of progressive revelation, where Scripture gradually reveals more about the same spiritual enemy. The first extended appearance of Ha-Satan is in the book of Job. The scene takes place in heaven. The sons of God come before the Lord, and Ha-Satan comes with them. Pay attention to what he does. The text doesn't begin by explaining who he is. Instead, it shows us his role. He questions Job's character. He challenges Job's faithfulness. He says, "Does Job fear God for nothing?" In other words, he argues that Job is only faithful because God has blessed and protected him. That isn't just a casual question. It's an accusation brought before God, almost like a prosecutor presenting a case in a courtroom. Throughout these chapters, Ha-Satan acts as the accuser, challenging Job's motives before God. That's why the setting matters. The whole scene unfolds like a courtroom, with God as judge and Ha-Satan bringing the accusation. But Job isn't the only place where this courtroom imagery appears. The same legal language surfaces again in the Psalms, where the word Satan is used in a way that reveals its original function. David prays, "Appoint a wicked man against him, and let an accuser stand at his right hand." Psalm 109:6. The Hebrew word translated accuser is Satan. Here it doesn't refer to the devil, it simply describes someone acting as an accuser or legal adversary. That's an important observation because it shows that in Hebrew, Satan was not always the name of one particular being. It could also describe a role, someone standing in opposition or bringing an accusation against another. Now keep that image in mind because it appears again in one of the clearest courtroom scenes in the Old Testament. In the book of Zechariah 3:1-2, the prophet Zechariah sees Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord. Standing at Joshua's right hand is a Satan, and the text tells us exactly why he is there: to accuse Joshua. Once again, the setting is a courtroom. Joshua stands before God. Satan stands ready to bring accusations against him. But before those accusations can succeed, the Lord himself rebukes Satan. When we place Job alongside Zechariah, a clear pattern begins to emerge. In both passages, Satan is presented primarily as the accuser, carrying out an adversarial role within the heavenly court. Now we come to one of the most surprising uses of the word Satan in the entire Hebrew Bible. Balaam is on his way to Moab when the angel of the Lord steps into the road and blocks his path. Here's the surprising part. The Hebrew text says that the angel of the Lord stood as a Satan against Balaam, that is, as an adversary. Notice that the passage is saying that the angel of the Lord is not Satan. Instead, he is acting as an adversary, standing in Balaam's way to stop him from going any farther. This teaches us that, in the original Hebrew context, Satan is not always a personal name. It can simply describe someone acting as an adversary or opponent. The meaning depends on who is carrying out that role. Now let's move to 1 Chronicles 21 verse 1. The text says, Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to number Israel. This verse is different from Job and Zechariah. In those passages, the Hebrew says, Ha-SatanThe adversary. Here, the definite article is missing. The text simply says Satan. Many biblical scholars see this as an important development. The word is beginning to function less like a title and more like the name of a specific being. Not every scholar agrees on exactly when that transition takes place, but most agree that this change in wording is significant. As the story of Scripture unfolds, the figure introduced earlier as the adversary is increasingly revealed as Satan, the personal enemy of God's people. As we move into the New Testament, the picture becomes much clearer. The Greek word diabolos, meaning slanderer or false accuser, is often used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament to translate Ha-Satan. The emphasis is still on accusation and opposition. Then we come to one of the Bible's clearest descriptions of Satan in Revelation, the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night. Notice how this connects with everything we've seen. In Job, Satan brings accusations before God. In Zechariah, Satan stands at Joshua's right hand to accuse him. And in Revelation, Satan is explicitly identified as the accuser of our brothers. The pattern is remarkably consistent. The New Testament doesn't discard the Old Testament picture, it completes it. The figure introduced in the Hebrew Bible as the adversary and the accuser is revealed more fully in the New Testament as Satan, the personal enemy of God and his people. So why does all of this matter? Because this isn't just a Hebrew word study. It changes how we understand spiritual warfare. The New Testament tells us that Satan tempts, he deceives, he seeks to destroy. All of that is true, but it also presents him as the accuser. One of his primary works is to accuse God's people before God and to fill their hearts with condemnation. Those accusations often sound like this: you're beyond forgiveness. You've failed too many times. God could never use someone like you. Those are more than discouraging thoughts. They are accusations against your standing before God. And that's exactly why Revelation says, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Take note of the answer to the accuser. It isn't our goodness. It isn't our performance. It is the finished work of Jesus Christ. Because of his death and resurrection, everyone who trusts in him has been declared righteous before God. The accuser may continue to bring charges, but the judge has already spoken. The Hebrew title Ha-Satan means the adversary or the accuser. In passages like Job and Zechariah, it highlights the role of one who stands in opposition and brings accusations before God. As the story of Scripture unfolds, that same adversary is revealed more fully in the New Testament as Satan, the devil, the enemy of God and his people. Understanding that Hebrew background doesn't replace what the New Testament teaches. It deepens our understanding of it. The tempter is also the accuser. The deceiver is also the slanderer. And the good news of the gospel is that every accusation against those who belong to Christ has already been answered at the cross. So let me ask you, before watching this study, did you think of Satan primarily as a tempter, a destroyer, or an accuser? Let me know in the comments. And if this study helped you see these passages in a new light, consider sharing it with someone else who loves studying the Bible. Until next time, Shalom.